next item on the agenda, speaking of the agenda. Here on new business, and general discussion, those 4 items are actually transposed, each one of them flipped. So we'll go in a little bit of a different order, than the on here, but it's the same content. We'll get around to it. So, the first of all, I hope everyone had a chance to review the meeting minutes from last time. Seeing lots of enthusiastic nods and that happened. Can I get a motion to approve those?
Motion to approve.
Second.
All opposed? All in favor?
Aye.
You can call for it. Good job, guys. So, next up is the opportunity for public comment, and I'll turn it over to city staff Jessica Altram.
Done, okay. Okay, so now is the time for public comment on any non-agenda matter falling within the scope of the Integrated Water Resources Planning Committee. There will also be time in conjunction with each agenda item in which the committee is making a decision for public comment. Please note the committee cannot take action on any item which does not appear on the agenda. All persons addressing the committee shall speak in a civil and courteous manner, and members of the audience shall be respectful of others. Please state your name and place of residence in an audible tone of voice for the record, and limit your comments to 3 minutes. General public comments to the committee can be found on the city's webpage. Seeing no public comment, we'll jump in here. Okay, so I wanted to, before we kind of dive into the more structured presentation, I wanted to see if the group had any questions on the memo and the follow-up items from the last meeting, where we covered growth rates used in other city plans, the bathymetry information, water quality, etc. Any questions on that?
I didn't really have questions. I wasn't sure, based on all the different numbers for the growth rates, I can't remember if we made an informal decision last time or if we need to amend that.
We will be revisiting that, so you'll have an opportunity to discuss that more.
And the only other question I had was on the bathymetry or highlight. I have no idea if that's something we should or shouldn't do or discuss with this family.
I think that we could have that discussion as well, once we start talking more about alternatives and talking through the priorities and, what data is necessary to kind of make these important decisions.
I just had one technical question on the growth rates and the follow-up. What is the acronym of CAGR?
Continuous annual growth rate.
Okay.
With regard to that, with all the acronyms that are being thrown around, I don't know if we could have like an acronym page that could be presented and at least inserted, for every.
Just glossary.
Yeah, it's kind of like, because sometimes it's kind of like, oh yeah, what is that? And I'm trying to go back as to when it was first used, and then maybe even on some of the information that's been posted on these, if there's something that's being used, throw it in at the very bottom, just for clarity's sake.
Okay.
It just kind of, it's like, it keeps you in a train of thought without having to go, what was that? Sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. We will do that. We can talk about water without, too many acronyms to keep track of, so.
It's regulations that go hand in hand.
This is not necessarily in relation to this follow-up. This made sense and was super helpful. Thanks for including it. But for the next meeting, I particularly found as I was starting to look at source water conservation alternatives, what would be helpful is, I know that I can find this on the water right query system, but a general sense of the water right portfolio of the city currently, I think would be helpful as you, at least for me, as I start thinking about other sources in doing this worksheet.
Sure, yeah, we can go that up.
Doesn't need to be super detailed. I know I can find abstracts myself, but just even like this level of detail of what the portfolio is, just to get a sense. Be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
That's on that. So I wanted to just briefly start with a community engagement update. And so we kicked off broad community engagement this week. And I wanted to just share a little bit about what we heard. Of course, there'll be a lot more forthcoming on this topic. We did receive an alternative recommendation from a resident who suggested utilizing water from the Yellowstone, specifically in the springtime, and using a stipend to move that to Bozeman. There was an additional suggestion from this member of the public for using that to also generate hydropower. So I wanted to share that. And then we were at the Tuesday Farmers Market yesterday evening and interacted with probably a dozen folks or so and had some good conversations. And some of the themes that came out of those conversations include questions about Canyon Ferry, comments about the importance of water quality, and then managing our supplies for drought and other events that would potentially relate to scarcity of any sort. And then just generally comments about water supply. So I just wanted to mention that. There were also a lot of conversations, it's not up here, about conservation and the importance of that too. And we'll continue to update you all as we move forward with more engagement, and these little updates will probably be longer in the future as we have more to update you with, so. Yeah.
Actually, I finally found my question.
Oh, sure.
So if we can go back to that.
Of course, yes.
So in reviewing presentation from last week, when we were talking about the basis of planning, discussion and supply, underneath total supply, 2024 actual use, including approved DEV development of 993 acre feet per year. So I guess my question on that approved amount of water, I assume that that's development that has now been incorporated into the city, and that 993 acre feet, is that only groundwater or is that ditch rights?
Yeah. You want me to take it?
And then also the second part of that question then is, with that water that is then part of that incorporation into the city, is that to be used only for irrigation? And then it goes back into that question of, is that kind of on hold to be then approved to be used for potable water? Or is that to be used only for irrigation purposes solely? So there you go.
Yeah, so we track very closely the water that we've allocated to development. So by that we mean if a development has reached a subdivision approval, pre-plat approval, or if there's a site plan approval, then we basically reserve that water at that point because we've given them basically authority to proceed. At that point, we've said we've got available water supply for you. So we're holding that basically in reserve, even though we're not using that today because the development hasn't been built yet. We're holding that water in reserve for that project. So that total 983, I don't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but basically that is all of the approved development that has reached that level of development approval. It has not been built yet. So basically we're tracking it to make sure that way we don't ever get our supply at some point. So it's a very, very tight tracking tool. That is also global water supply. So if, for example, if a development has a non-public source, it does not account against that number.
Okay, so is there some water that is non-potable that is associated with some of those developments?
Yes.
As well?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in essence, that could actually be used for irrigation purposes. So, and I guess this leads into another question. Does the city have the ability to go ahead and require with certain, and I don't know if there's a size limitation on development or a non-potable water supply, to require them to actually drill groundwater wells to be used specifically for irrigation?
Yeah, so the way our parks requirements are written in the city code, it requires the priority use of non-potable water. So right now, a lot of those are exempt wells. So we're irrigating a lot of our parks with exempt wells. Now, the second option, right, immediately following exempt wells is to use an agricultural water right that's tied to that property. And then basically, instead of putting the pump in the well, putting the pump in the ditch and then irrigating with that. Now, absent that option, they're allowed to connect to the city water supply if they don't, if they don't have access to either of those options. Obviously, we prefer not to do that. We'd rather see the other priorities be just because we'd rather use our potable water supply, which goes through the treatment and all pumping and the storage, all the costs associated with that. We'd rather reserve that for as much potable use as possible. It's been our strategy today. So, yeah, when you're looking at that number, that we used in 2024, as well as that allocated number of 983, acre feet per year, that's basically tracking specifically on the potable water supply.
And these are developments that have been technically approved as of December 31st of 2024.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And the other thing to keep in mind with that approved development, it's because it's approved doesn't mean it necessarily will get built.
Sure.
In some cases, developments, just depending on what's happening with the economy, they may stall out. They may take quite a bit of time to build. So, I mean, who knows how long it would take to build out that 983 acre feet? But maybe 2 years and maybe 10 years. It's just hard to predict.
And then there's Mrs. Looks-Up and her son who took out a mobile home park and did nothing.
Yeah.
So we have everything. I asked another. And then on the basis of planning discussion and demand, where you provide, Bozeman has 120 gallons per capita per day. And then it has, Bozeman having, 190 gallons per household per day. So I ran the calculations there. And so this comes out to a number of about a little less than 1.6 persons per household. As an engineer, I run a lot of math, and I always have to kind of, after the math is done, I have to look at the numbers and go, does that make sense? And that seems low to me. So, and then it made me then think about what is a household in the city's terminology? Is that every apartment and such? And then with regards to houses around us, there's a lot of, they're renting out the top floor and the basement. Is that one household? And then how do you handle all the students at MSU? Because we have 17,000 students. Let's say 5,000 of those students are on campus, but then you've got another 12,000 that are then in the valley, but most of those are still going to be in town. So I guess I'm trying, in order to be able to use these numbers that we're trying to go ahead and work around, because obviously the next part of the demand was taking that baseline number and then trying to go ahead and figure out efficiency and conservation with plumbing codes and conservation and such. I need to know that our baseline number, is that really accurate? And does it really represent what we're trying to work with? So.
Yeah, I can just maybe jump in on that one. So the way that we calculate our gallons per capita day is we take our total production, and then we basically, break that out by a daily use and then our population from a census estimate. And so I think the thing to note there is that with our gallons per capita day, we're attributing all the commercial water use, all of the non-residential water use to each person that lives in Bozeman based on the census estimate, which is why taking a gallons per capita day and then comparing that to the gallons per household per day doesn't quite work, because the gallons per household is just accounting for that. And so the gallons per household per day value is derived from basically our metered end use for single family households. Was that,
And to be clear, we're proposing to use the 120 gallons per person per day for all planning purposes as the baseline. We're not using that household number. That was just put in there as some context.
Okay,
Wasn't part of the difference there too, that, I mean, if you have a household with 4 people in it, the water they use for irrigation is just used once. I mean, it's still in the total number it's used, but for those other 3 people in the house, you don't need to include the irrigation water, so they're gonna be different for that reason too, right? I mean, it's not accounted for that way, but I mean, if you compare like per capita water use, and then you do that conversion to household, in a given household, you know, everybody wouldn't necessarily use that full amount, is that? You know,
I'm not sure I'm following.
well,
sorry.
okay, so I think what you're saying is, okay, you're saying, say 110 per capita, you got a family of 4, that should be 440. But, you know, that per capita use is including the irrigation water for the lot. And that's only used, there's only one use for that, so you don't multiply that by 4, so they're not gonna be a simple multiplication of the number of people in the house.
Correct, yeah, plus that per capita use is accounting for all the commercial properties, right? And then that's what really moves the needle on that one.
Okay.
Because the irrigation use is, we don't have sub-meters, so the irrigation use is captured in the household daily usage because it's all running through the same meter, indoor and outdoor.
okay, you just said that you can't split up the indoor and outdoor use, but yet you've got this table here that does that.
So we don't based on our metering infrastructure. We can based on an understanding of what our baseline wintertime demands are, because that we know represents indoor use. And then from there, right, we can make some pretty good assumptions about what outdoor demands are.
Okay.
Yeah, we just don't meter that separately. That's what I was trying to say.
Understand.
Yeah.
Um, I guess part of my trying to understand this is that you're showing examples that Bozeman is at 120 gallons per person per day. And you're giving comparables to like Boulder, Denver, and Bend. And so it's already showing that we're in such a favorable category and we're below everybody else. Because then you also show what the national average is and that the arid weight you make that comparison in the per household per day. And so it shows that we're at 120 gallons per person per day. We're in really good shape already.
Yeah, we're doing really well, actually.
Okay. And, because I think you and I had a conversation last week or last time about Missoula, and they're in the 300 gallons
I
per
don't
person.
remember that number off the top of my head.
That's what I don't remember either.
Oh, okay. But it was exorbitantly high relative to Bozeman.
Yeah, and if you recall, a big part of that is because of the leakage in their water distribution system.
Oh, that's right. Leaking pipes, who cares, right? It's all coming from the river anyway. Okay, like I said, I'm just trying to go ahead and wrap my head around the baseline numbers, because that's what we're trying to then even improve upon. So, I mean, if we're already doing so much better than everybody else, it just seems as though that makes our task that much harder, right? Because from conservation, I mean, a lot of this is coming from conservation as well as, so these numbers, 120, is this as of 2024? So with all the work that has been done since 2013?
Correct.
Okay.
That's a good segue into our conservation plan, and I can shed a little bit more light on what we've been doing and what we plan to be doing in the future, and we can go from there too. So hopefully that'll help with some context around that. So with that, I also wanted to just show this on the screen, but there was a question about the PAC members. Their first meeting will be this evening, and I just wanted to put that on the screen here. It's also in your packet. And so, down the road, we'll be convening the whole Water Advisory Committee, and you'll get to meet these folks in person, but All right, so I'm going to try not to take too much time because I know you guys don't want to have time for discussion, but I just want to give a primer on our drought plan and our conservation plan to help give you more context as you start thinking about these big questions. So our drought plan was most recently updated in 2022. And it really includes 5 main sections in the plan. So it has a vulnerability assessment, a drought monitoring framework, drought communication campaign, drought mitigation and response measures, and then enforcement as well. I'll be talking in a little bit more detail about the monitoring framework and the response measures. But before I do that, I think it's important, and this group knows better than most, that there are at least a dozen definitions of drought out there. And so when we're talking about drought in the city of Bozeman, we're really talking about below normal water supplies that are immediately impacting our community based on our water supply sources. As well as below normal reservoir levels that result from a prolonged reduction in precipitation. So touching base a little bit more on the drought monitoring framework. So we're fortunate to have a really great tool that allows us to monitor these water supplies as well as regional drought indices every day if we want to. And that just allows us to kind of, keep in touch with what water supplies are doing, what the conditions look like so that we can make, proactive decisions around drought management and drought declarations if we need to. So the tool really evaluates local stream flow, such as like the East and West Fork of Highlight Creek and Gallatin River, snowpack in the Bridgers and the Gallatin Range, and then highlight reservoir levels. It also looks at our water demand, so looking at our total daily production and then evapotranspiration rates, because that's a really good indicator of outdoor water use. It also looks at the US Drought Monitor and the Evaporative Demand Drought Index. So all of those are actually in the tool that's crunching numbers and taking any of those values to determine what our drought score is. And the score relates directly to drought stages that are outlined in the plan. But aside from the data in the tool, we also look at precipitation patterns and weather forecasts, et cetera. And so all of this information helps staff make informed decisions about recommendations for drought declarations to our city manager. Our city manager has the authority to declare drought by administrative order.
Just a quick question.
Yes.
I might have missed part of it. So that tool you're talking about, is that something the city of Bozeman is doing directly, or is it the state drought monitoring program that's putting that out?
Yeah, it's something the city of Bozeman has, the A2S actually built the tool for us years ago. And so it's unique to the city of Bozeman. Yeah. So some of the drought response measures, so if we were to declare a drought, what would we do? There are 4 stages of drought in the plan. During a stage 1 drought, we would likely just more strongly encourage water conservation, but not have any mandatory watering restrictions. We would implement a drought surcharge of anywhere from 0 to 25%, and that rate depends on your water rate class and then tier as well, because we have a tiered rate structure for our single households. And each of these stages really has an overall system-wide water use reduction goal, right? And so when we declare a certain stage of drought, we're targeting a certain percent, right, that we can reduce demand by as a community. And so it's 10% for stage 1. Stage 2 is we would likely have additional outdoor watering restrictions. Drought surcharges would increase a little bit, anywhere from 10 to about 41%, and hoping that we can reduce demand by 20%. And then stage 3 and 4 get a little more serious. Stage 3, we'd likely have just an outright lawn watering ban and maybe restrict some other outdoor water uses. Drought surcharges would increase quite a bit from 20 to 100%, hoping we can achieve a 30% reduction in use. And then stage 4 would really be more like a water rationing program. We would really just want to keep water use, kind of reserved for essential uses. Drought surcharges would again increase with the hope that we could reduce citywide use by 40%.
Quick question,
Yes.
partly because I'm probably one of the only people in this room that doesn't pay a Bozeman water bill.
Sure.
And I have my own water problems as of the last week in here, but like, on the drought surcharge, is that an additional charge on their monthly water bill that customers receive?
It is. So the drought surcharge only goes into place during a drought declaration. And it's an additional charge. And, the way that those have been structured, there's kind of two pieces to that. So, one is to ensure that we have revenue stability so that when we reduce, right, when we as a community reduce our outdoor water use, we as a city kind of still can keep the lights on, right? So that's one element. As you get into the, stage 3 and 4, when you see that 100-200% surcharge, that's really intended to send a price signal to customers, because at that point, we would expect no outdoor water use. The earlier stages, so stage 1 and 2, those percentages are less about sending a price signal and really just about revenue stability. And we actually structured them so that if I'm a single family homeowner and I do my part in a stage 2 and I reduce my use by 20%, my bill should remain the same with the surcharge, right? So it's really not meant to be a penalty or anything like that. It's really all about revenue stability. Yeah.
What's the surcharge money go to? Is it still just the general fund or?
It goes into our water fund. So just like anyone that pays a water bill with or without a surcharge, it goes to support our treatment, water sewer operations. There's a tiny sliver that goes toward conservation, so.
Do you, are 100% of the homes on the system metered, or is it a lower percent?
Yeah.
Caveat to that, and that is, for multifamily units, we just have 1 meter to the entire building, so we don't have seven metering for each of the units in that building.
No, that's fair enough, yeah. I know some cities, have started that process, but they started late, so they have some that are, some that aren't. Makes it complicated. Sure.
The water fund, is there a certain portion that is allocated towards future construction projects like what's been happening and improving, the water lines and such, or, the water storage work that's being done up in Sourdough now?
Sure, I feel that one.
Yeah, so we have essentially 3 funds that support the water system. And it's based on the concept of growth pays for growth. So the water utility fund, basically the water bill that everybody pays on a monthly basis, that supports all of our operations and maintaining and operating our existing water system. We have 2 funds. One's the water impact fee program that we use to build capital infrastructure that's capacity expanded. So that's basically adding, say if we were to construct a new well, we would use that impact fee program to pay for that new well and the treatment and the pumping associated with that, storage associated with that. So that's a capacity expanding fund, and then the other capacity expanding fund is the catch and move water rights program. So we use that to buy water rights specifically to expand the capacity of the system. So so long story short, we essentially are using 2 of the funds to build capital replacement as well as capital expansion projects.
The one cash in lieu, a lot of money, is that only being fed just through that process of new development and then cash in lieu? Okay.
Yeah. So basically, for those that don't know what the cash into the water rights program is, basically developers have 3 options to bring water supply to the table when they bring a new development. They can bring a useful water right to the city, which actually was pretty challenging to do. They can do water conservation work, which basically at this point, every single development is doing water conservation work with their project as they come in, because frankly, it's the cheapest water supply. The third option is then to pay the city cash into the water rights for the remainder. So whatever they can't, get on the demand side, they're paying basically cash into the water rights to make up the difference of the impact of their development. So we use that cash into the water rights tool to buy the water rights, and we've essentially only used that up to this point for purchasing shares in the Highlight Reservoir.
Are you able to buy, ditch rights?
We could,
Have you done that yet?
we have not done that yet, although we have acquired ditch rights, with some annexations. In some cases, we've been able to put those to use. An example would be the sports park. So the sports park.
Okay,
Yeah, out there at Cottonwood and Oak and Baxter, basically. So we irrigate the sports park with non-potable water supply, and that's all from the ditch rights.
okay.
There are other places the city's doing that?
We're doing that with the cemetery as well. So although I wouldn't say it's ditch rights necessarily, it was non-potable water right that the city's had for a while. We had a non-potable right in Bozeman Creek that we basically put a pump station on Bozeman Creek and irrigate the cemetery with that, which is quite a bit of work, actually.
I'm gonna be that guy and suggest we move on, like keep talking about drought.
Okay. Well, that was the end of that slide anyway, so perfect. And I just wanted to quickly touch on, because there was a question last month about the drought declaration in 2021. So I wanted to follow up on that. So in June of 21, we were experiencing below average precipitation. So about 5 to 25% of normal precipitation, coupled with, 7 to 8 degrees above average temperature. So that was a perfect storm early in the season to create a drought scenario for us. And so with that, we declared a stage 2 drought declaration in mid-July. And I'll mention too that at that time, we didn't have our permanent watering restrictions in place. So, anyone could water to their heart's content. Right now, the norm, the baseline is 3 day per week watering, but that was not in place then. And so going from from as much as you want to 2 day per week was a big change. And so we tracked our demands after this drought declaration to get an understanding of whether or not we're achieving that system-wide water use reduction, kind of what things are looking like. And it was a success story. So this graph is showing our June to September total production, million gallons a day. And what you can see in that first kind of red block that I've highlighted to the left is that from mid-June to mid-July, demands they really almost touched 13 million gallons a day, which is high for a normal day in August. So seeing that in June was pretty wild. So demands were definitely reflective of our weather conditions in June and into July. And so we declared a drought right around September 15th. So as you can see, the demands fall down. That's when we declared the drought and instituted 2 day per week watering. And in comparing our demands early in the season to our August demands, which are typically the highest in a typical year, we saw a 28% reduction in water demand. And I'll just remind the group that the goal was 20% for stage 2. So that was a success story. I also wanted to mention that because I know there's been some discussion about how much we can get out of using the drought plan as we think about these other supply alternatives, talking about climate change. And so 28% reduction exceeded our goal. We didn't have watering restrictions in effect then, so if we were to repeat that now, it's hard to say if it would be the same or not, but I just wanted to give that as sort of a touch point on the effectiveness of the plan. It's the only time we've declared drought with the plan in place, so that's my only example.
When did you say it started?
So the hot, dry conditions started in June.
The actual July, that's.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I
yeah,
guess it's
July.
September,
Yeah.
right, so.
Yeah, thank
Okay, I was looking at the chart, I'm like, it doesn't look great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So with that, I'm gonna shift gears into our conservation plan. So this was adopted in 2023 and it really serves two purposes. So one is to kind of provide a roadmap for program growth that's informed by, how much water we can save with each measure that we implement over the course of this timeframe. And it's also to quantify achievable savings to inform basically things like an IWRP update, right? So that we can have an idea of what's achievable on conservation as we think about additional supply alternatives. The plan has 3 different programs laid out in it. Basically, each of the programs include a different suite of program measures. You can think of a program measure as anything from a suite of indoor rebates to a policy change. And the reason that we took this program-based approach is because we recognize that if you were to just have a list of 25 measures, which is how many we evaluated, and they each have their savings associated with them, if you stack them up differently, you could double count savings, right? Because there's some overlap in those. And so the intent of the programs was to remove that double counting to ensure that we're being conservative in what we're estimating to save through each program. The program A in the plan was really our existing program. We've done a little bit more since then, but essentially it's our existing program. Program B is ultimately the recommended measures from the city commission adoption of the plan. And program C was all the model measures. There's 18 measures in program B and 25 were modeled in program C. We really were driven by the cost benefit of this, right? So we did a deep dive into a cost benefit analysis. And the table on the screen is just showing that all of them had a benefit cost ratio above 1, which means it pencils out for the city. Program B had the highest benefit cost ratio. In addition to costs, we also considered stakeholder input, a balance of voluntary and regulatory measures in each of the programs, measure equitability so that we're reaching all of our customer classes, as well as customer demographics. So the existing program measures that our division is doing right now is distribution system auditing. So that doesn't include all of the repairs and everything that our water ops crew does, but just kind of the auditing to understand what our leakage is in our system. Utilizing a customer water use portal. So we have something called AMI meters, which basically show nearly real-time water use, and customers can be alerted to leaks by using this portal. The next thing on here is improving city facility irrigation. We also offer customer water use assessments. So we'll do audits on irrigation systems, and then more recently we've launched a program auditing commercial systems, indoor use, big facilities and all of the water systems that we would see in an average home. That's been really successful as well. We have a really robust public education campaign. We have a number of drought tolerant demonstration gardens in the community to help folks kind of get an understanding of what these native, low water use landscapes look like. Irrigation contractor training and education. So we offer classes to folks that work in that field every year to help them kind of stay up on water efficient practices. We offer efficient fixture giveaways, and then we have about 10 rebate programs covering indoor and outdoor uses. And then more recently, we adopted a water efficient landscape ordinance so that new homes, as of a year ago, are required to have more efficient landscaping and irrigation installed.
Your comment.
Sorry?
I want to commend you on the AMI and the customer water use portal. So my wife and I have a rental house, and I happened to go over and was talking with one of the tenants, and I did my walk around, and I noticed that they had left the hose on. And they'd done some watering the garden or whatever, and then simply just forgot to close it off. So I turned it off. I ended up going back to my house, pulled up my computer. I ended up getting a notification from the city saying, it appears that you have been utilizing too much water over the last 48, 72 hours. I was like, well, bingo. That just told me exactly how long they had been at that hose to turn it on. And so it was a perfect opportunity because it's also located in a very obscure corner of the house that they would not even be going to. So unless they have a trained ear to notice, it's like, wow, the water's running, I should be aware of that. But as the landlord, it gave me the opportunity to, I would have then gone in and said, hey, you got a problem, let's figure out what's going on. So.
Great.
It worked just the way it was supposed to. So kudos to the city on that one.
Awesome, that's good to hear. And then just to touch on the recommended additional measures in that program B that's outlined in the plan. So these are the things to come. One is a low income leak repair assistance and direct installation program. So you can think of that as basically like a rebate program for folks that might need financial assistance to install efficient fixtures as well as repair leaks. A commercial high efficiency washer rebate. An impact fee credit program, so really that would tie into our existing impact fee program, and it would allow developers to implement efficiency measures to reduce their impact fees. A requirement for irrigation designers and installers to receive some sort of certification that would come on the heels of a training they took in water efficient, design or installation, whatever that may be. And then lastly is mandatory water efficiency offsets. And so Sean was mentioning, those 3 avenues for meeting our water adequacy code, right? Cash in lieu, transferring water rights, and then efficiency. So this measure would essentially require that developers implement the water efficiency kind of piece of that. And the way that would work in reality is that they could, with their development, they could make that development as efficient as possible, right? Lower that demand as much as they can, and then go off site and make other properties more efficient as well. The idea being that they could potentially achieve like a net zero impact on demand through efficiency projects. And so I will say that's a pretty aggressive measure, and it is one of the measures in the plan that moves the needle most on use as we look at savings. And so all of these measures, they are in the conservation plan, but I also just want to mention to the group that as we continue to work through the IWRP planning, there are other things we could evaluate, right? There are things that may be in the plan that we decide aren't a priority or maybe are an even bigger priority. And so I wanted to lay the framework for how we've been thinking about conservation, but also just mention that we're not tied to this. So, there is room to explore other conservation alternatives. Just to summarize all of that, program B, I was gonna say, I don't remember this one. Program B, basically says that, by the year 2040, if we implement everything as outlined, we can expect to save about 4,400 acre feet of water. That's enough water for nearly 18,000 single households or 35,000 multi-household units. And it achieves a 40 gallons per capita day reduction, dropping us from 120 to 180, or 80, sorry. 120 to 80. And I'll also mention that gallons per capita day reduction exceeds the goal outlined in the previous integrated water resource plan. So with that, I think you're.
First, are there any additional questions or comments about the conservation program? Do we feel like that's a good briefing on progress that's been made? I mean, been basically an amazing view of water source. When you think about it, we are using water in society having water source. So we've been talking about, this gets back to the question earlier about where are we with the basis of planning recommendations. So we're really hopeful today. Some guidance on how to proceed. We're also having our first public advisory committee subcommittee meeting this evening. And so they'll be trailing a little bit behind you guys, but it's exciting for us to be able to walk in and say, we have a group that's the technical group side of this, who've been talking about this for several meetings now, and we've made some good progress getting a sense of kind of where we want to deviate from the 2013 plan and the like. So everybody's cool. We'll jump into kind of the basis of planning conversation and bring it home.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna try to land the plane here with basis of planning. I'm gonna summarize what I think we've discussed, but we're still open to further discussion on each of these items. But I'll summarize where I think we have attempted to land the plane. I think I probably said this the first meeting, but my head is in this kind of stuff like weekly, and you guys are probably just in this monthly, so if I'm moving too fast or you have questions about details, just stop. So I think what we discussed last time was assuming a 3% annual population growth with some bounds of plus or minus 0.5% to evaluate. We definitely also agreed that we would consider climate impacted supply over that. And again, let's just kind of bringing Jessica's presentation into the light of how we're going to move that forward for the IWRP is this last piece here with conservation. So population, this is showing the 3% with the plus or minus 0.5% with dashed lines. I don't expect you to look at numbers here. I have this tabulated. So in 50, so this is, I'll remind everybody, this is a 50-year plan. We're looking out 50 years. So in 50 years at 3% growth, that would be 2075, we'd be 264,000 people, which is approximately 3,700 people per square mile, which would put Bozeman somewhere between Boise and Denver in terms of density. So there's a lot going on here, but how does that correlate to demand? So the red line here is showing baseline demand increasing at that 3%. So annual demand increasing at that 3%. However, with the plumbing codes applied to it. So we're assuming in this graph, I'm assuming that the plumbing codes are implemented regardless of what we decide today to do, which is a fair assumption. Those are just national standards that are improving water efficiency every year. So we take that 120 gallons per person per day times the population, reduce it by the assumed plumbing code reduction, and we get this red line. And then the dashed lines surrounding the red line are the plus or minus 0.5%. What our TAC is, as for this IWRP, is to take that reliable supply, which is horizontal blue line there, dash blue line, and increase it, right, to with different alternatives, implementing different alternatives to meet the demand gap. So it's just a hypothetical supply curve. It's not just to show kind of what the intention of this plan is. I'll remind you that we're evaluating supply, reliable supply, as the 1 in 50-year drought conditions, and that climate impacted, that will reduce in 50 years and reduce again in 100 years, and we have that modeled. I think I shared that table in a previous presentation. So our goal is to improve that supply with this plan. Back to conservation. This is showing that same baseline demand with the plumbing codes implemented in red. And then 3 conservation scenarios. Conservation Program A, which just presented. Conservation Program B, which just presented, which was also the recommendation out of the conservation plan in the green line. And then the dashed line is kind of maybe hard to see, but between the blue and the green is Conservation Program B, but capped at 100 gallons per person per day, which is an arbitrary number we chose, representing a potential capping of where we think conservation can take us. This is mostly just meant to show the benefit of conservation and the potential alternatives we look at in terms of conservation. My recommendation here is to, as we're evaluating alternatives, supply alternatives, optimization alternatives, we also evaluate conservation as an alternative, just as the 2013 IWRP did. So I would recommend we use that baseline demand as our basis of planning and consider the conservation programs or variations of those as alternatives to evaluate for improving the supply gap.
I would just follow on, so that would be basically 50% of the plan B.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yep, you're absolutely right. 50% of plan B. Because it would get us down to 80. It's just a hypothetical alternative. The intent is to look at others as we discuss them or just use the ones that are presented in the conservation plan.
And can I ask a question on just sort of on the percent growth rate? You know, I know we kind of fell into 3%. But then in the packet, you know, I think we'd asked for some other information, and so there were some other numbers there.
Yeah.
I saw essentially the city of Bozeman wastewater facilities plans, you know, were 4%. So then I was starting to think, well, maybe geez, it's 3% right. But you know, you're saying 3% plus or minus 5, but when you show that graph, I guess I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about, I mean, are we really planning that at 3.5, or how do you account for that 0.5% fluctuation?
I think so I'd like to hear your thoughts, all of your own thoughts, but how we would present it is this is the water demand we expect. And these are kind of error bars or boundaries that we anticipate within that year. So if we have a gap of 16,000 acre feet in 50 years at 3%, we would say, well, just so everybody's aware, at 3.5%, it would be whatever that is, you know, an increased water gap, just to provide some balance of how impactful this plan is.
Right.
And I will know, I think I said a couple of meetings ago, while it's important, this percent growth rate that we choose, it's not, you know, written in stone. These plans are adaptive and going to change year to year potentially. All those plans presented in that pre-meeting memo, I've been part of some of those, and they all have varying percent growth rates, but all kind of within the 3-4%. So
Yeah, that answers my other question is, you know, I assume that, you know, the way it would really work is if we get down the road another 10 years and we're consistently above that 3%, the city would reevaluate that jump.
absolutely.
You'll be back in this chair in 10 more years. You're changing this.
He's still be alive in 10 years, that's good.
If I could add one comment of color to that too, is, you know, as you can tell by the presentations that the city's been giving, and I guess us too, city doesn't look at this every 10 years. It's a very granular approach. It's every year they're paying attention to what's going on.
It's dynamic.
Yeah.
So this is a question kind of to those of you that were part of the IWRP in 2013. So in the executive summary, you provide information that talks about a moderate population projection, which was 2% for 30 years and 1% for the next 20. And then the high population projection was 3% for 30 years, but then 2 for the next 20. So you had kind of a scaled down version. So I guess what was the basis for, I mean, that's obviously, you know, a long time ago, but we're not talking about doing any kind of a step down now. We're just simply saying you're just utilizing 3% and running with that. So what was the basis for doing a step down? And was it, why should we, or why should we not think of it in the same sort of context?
A long time ago, but you know, the two themes that I would say probably resonated the most is that, you know, we were coming out of the recession, you know, 2013, you know, just before that, you know, you kind of had that memory of the recession. And so there was some, you know, wanting a little bit of a lower bandwidth, some wanted a little bit, you know, higher bandwidth of what the potential future could bring. So that's what brought about the different ranges, I would say. Why it was tapered is, you know, if you look at those curves, they tend to, you know, exponentially increase in the out years. And so it was kind of an intent to manage that, you know, exponential impact of, you know, continuing to apply this, you know, the same more aggressive rate. So we tapered it off in the latter years of the 50-year planning window.
Should we be looking at it? I mean,
I don't know that we had, the same discussion that we've had in, you know, with this group as far as, you know, maybe the opportunity to continue to look at it repetitively each year or every 5 years or whatever the case is. And so, you know, to set it out, you know, as a consistent population growth rate, you know, for the 50-year window, you know, while it might look, you know, somewhat aggressive or unrealistic in the out years, there's plenty of opportunity to, you know, to adjust and react to reality.
Yeah,
But you can advise.
No, I mean, I guess what I remember as a tax person was, it was more like, I don't think, you know, we weren't like, here's a curve of 3%, you know, these are, we had those different alternatives and we picked that one with that, you know, they were all tapered, except different options for the members. But I think, you know, I mean, for what we're doing, that we're safe to just go with, I don't think we need to do it, like, just because, like we said, we're constantly reevaluating this plan, and so, you know, this is gonna occur again before 30 years comes by, so I think, you know, that's probably, we'll see, but I think it's solid.
I think it's the simpler approach also, that's my take. Just a consistent approach rather than change here.
We see a long period of decline in growth, then so you can adjust in other ways too, but probably better to plan for the more worst case scenario.
well, like what you said, Alan, when looking at the other plans that they had submitted, you know, and I think this is great with regards to what the city has done with the water treatment plan. That's 4%. And then everything else is fairly consistent with 2.75 up to 4.
Got a red light over here. Oh,
There we go.
it's gone.
We're good when you're us now, Holly. Check.
That's better, thank you. Yes, I couldn't find my unmute button. Thank you.
Thanks. I was gonna say something.
So I guess in light of compared to what the other plans are, I think our 3%, which we talked about before, is still seemingly accurate, and I don't see any reason to go ahead and step it down because I really think that this is gonna reconvene in about 10 to 15 years. And, you know, I mean, it's idealistic to go ahead and go 30 to 50, and I think that, yeah, there's a reason to do that, but in practicality, this is too important of an issue to just simply kind of put our numbers and names on it and say, well, you know, that's good for the long haul. Excellent.
I don't know who could address this, but is there some other reason that for the wastewater plan, they went with that higher number? Yeah,
Oh, I think just thinking back to the timing on the wastewater plan, it was closer to the pandemic growth rates. And the pandemic growth rates, we were up over 4%, and there wasn't an expectation that would continue on into infinity. But it was a fairly conservative approach. To add some context, there, our current official growth rate's about 1.4%, so it's dropped pretty dramatically from the pandemic. But I think it, you know, again, kind of, you know, along the lines of the prior example, that's what was in everybody's mind at the time because growth rates were so high at that moment.
yeah, because I mean, you know, the other thing I'd add in terms of just the group's thinking is that, you know, wastewater facilities have the same issues that water supply facilities have in terms of leakage. Except they know, like historically, Bozeman had a bigger problem with infiltration, not leakage. And so there's a lot of water that was being treated that was just groundwater coming into the pipes. And I think that's mostly been addressed.
It has,
There are a lot going on North Rousestown, was not a very hot spot.
it has to an extent. We're continuing to work on it. You never truly pull every drop of groundwater out of the system because you're always working on replacing pipes, but we definitely made up some ground. We went from in the spring, you know, at the groundwater levels rise and you see that seasonal high groundwater level. We rose from, I think it was right around 6 million gallons per day to like 9, right around there.
But there's also that other problem with some of those subdivisions that were pumping water out of their basements into the plumbing. So, yeah, which contributes part of that, which hopefully can get resolved. But
Yeah, we made that illegal, but at the same time, trying to make sure that plumbers don't do it is a challenge.
It feels like, are we consolidating around 3% being okay?
Yeah, I just, when I walked in this morning, I was wondering, but I think after this discussion, I'm still happy with that.
And Holly, will, you have a different idea or thought, we're certainly open. A little bit quiet when you unmute and speak, so it might be better to either put a thumbs up or put a note in the chat. It'd be helpful, but doesn't sound like we're having a whole lot of objections to move the 3%, so maybe we move along to the next item here. Zach?
Yeah, I guess maybe the next question, which I think we are pretty settled on, but just assuming that our supply is impacted by climate and therefore reduced per the water supply optimization management tool model values in the 2022 report. Again, I think I presented those numbers before, but the supply is in 20 years is reduced by approximately 1,000 acre feet, and then in 50 years, another 1,000 acre feet based on climate projections. I'm assuming that is kind of our baseline supply that we're all agreeing to assume for which to calculate demand gaps, supply gaps, rather. Any objections to that being the assumption?
no,
Okay. And then I don't know if we really have a question on this. I don't know if I ever got kind of consensus from the city either, but are we good with moving forward, looking at conservation as alternatives and various alternatives and rather than using it as a baseline to assume demand.
Yes.
Yeah.
I guess I wonder, why is it an alternative? Why isn't it just part of the assumption? I mean, alternatives to me are kind of like still throwing out what could be used, whereas conservation seems like it just part of the program and just makes sense to just move forward. So I think it's just kind of terminology.
I think the technical work will show that to be true. It will show that that's the lowest hanging fruit and that's the cheapest option to move forward. And I think this way we just kind of quantitatively prove that by evaluating them as equals to a new reservoir. For example.
Yeah. I mean, I understand why in 2013 it was an alternative, but now it's been proven. And so, yeah, sure.
I
Say
can
it
see
is
that
just
too.
part of the program.
I could see that that path forward as well.
And I would add a little context to that, and if you think of, the demand side of the equation and the supply side of the equation as two sides of the same coin. I don't think we have to look at, the water conservation measures that we have planned and our plan is set in stone. I think part of the goal of the group is really to look at those measures that we haven't yet implemented and say, okay, does it still make sense to take that approach, and we'll look at each of those alternatives. So I think to Zach's point, we're really looking at each of those very similarly to the way we would look at a new well for example. Say what makes the most sense.
Yeah, it's kind of how I was thinking, just like what conservation measures have not yet been implemented. It's not that the city isn't already conserving, it's just what are these other ways to conserve water that haven't been considered yet or tried yet?
As in there's like conservation A, which has already been implemented, and conservation B are still things to be considered. But they would be the alternatives, the way my mind works.
Or ones that aren't in program B, that, the group wants to, yeah, right, and I think that's maybe also, what Zach's being as, like, it provides the opportunity for that conversation to revisit and check and see if that still makes sense, or if we want to take a different path.
That's all I had for basis of planning. Do we wanna go into the next stuff or take a break?
We're gonna get here in like 15 or 20,
Okay,
so if everyone can push through a little longer, we'll have a break soon.
We have no choice.
okay. We are moving on to alternatives development. I saw Danica, you brought some of those cut sheets.
These are already. Here.
Oh, gotcha. So I'm gonna cover some of those and kind of, but I encourage everybody to look through the 2013 IWRP, Appendix C, is it? That goes over all the alternatives. I think there's 25 of them or something.
Yeah.
That were evaluated, in 2013, as well as kind of the criteria used to rank them. And I'll discuss that process today, but I, again, encourage you to look through it on your own. I'm familiar with it because I think we're going to propose a similar, structure for this IWRP.
Zach, I'm just gonna chime in. You all asked for printouts of the slides of these meetings and I failed you, but they're on their way. So if you hold out a little longer, you will have slides to write on very shortly. I'm very excited about that. Sorry about that.
So before I jump into those alternatives, here we go. And go over the alternative development process, which Nate covered a little bit last time. So I'm not gonna go into great depth with any of this, but it was essentially a three-stage process in filtering out alternatives. So we started with what was feasible legally, physically, and then the TAC and the TAC group qualitatively evaluated those, and I'll go over those rankings or those criteria. And then the third step was the technical work, or putting costs and supply achieved to each of those alternatives and putting them into different portfolios, similar to what Jess was talking about with the conservation programs. These were put into portfolios, various groupings of alternatives. Were put into portfolios and evaluated to find what the TAC thought was the best to move forward with and to recommend. So there were 5 categories of qualitative. So this is step 2 in the screening process. This is the qualitative screening where I think your input is going to be the most valued. There were 5 categories: technical, environmental, social, economic, and water supply. And I'll walk through each of these. Again, this is all in the IWRP, the previous IWRP, but just so we're all on the same page, I think it's useful to go over it together. So technical included regulatory impact, infrastructure compatibility. So how compatible is it with the city's existing infrastructure? For example, if we need to build a complete new water treatment plant, that is obviously a lot more expensive than being able to utilize or optimize their existing water treatment plant. Redundancy, ability to meet planning horizon water gap. I think those are self-explanatory. Environmental, so compliance with regulations, in-stream flow maintenance. So maintaining in-stream flows was a evaluation criteria previously. Permitting, ease or difficulty, environmental impact, carbon footprint, and climate resilience. Social criteria include customer service, public health, quality of life, public support, economic development, and growth. Economic, obviously costs, capital costs, O&M costs, eligibility for outside funding, economy of scale, and this concept of growth to pay for growth, ability for growth to pay for growth. Water supply, reliability of the supply, quality of the new supply, proximity to the city and to their existing infrastructure, safety, storage volume potential, and impact on other water supplies. Questions on these screening alternatives? Or sorry, the screening criteria.
So obviously now this time we're divided up into the TAC and the PAC. So which one, the social criteria is not going to be addressed by us? Are we?
I think you can have an opinion on that.
Okay, so we're still dealing with all of these within the TAC. Okay, I didn't know how you were.
I'm not giving you a pass on that, you
Really? Okay, I just wasn't sure because of how you decided to go ahead and have 2 different.
That's a good question, but I think we assembled a group of technical experts knowing that you're also human beings and citizens and of this community. And so I'm sure certainly your opinion on that would be valued. Well, also end up asking very similar questions to the PAC, and just because they don't have a PE behind their name, doesn't mean we might have an opinion about something that's on the technical side, but at some point we'll marry the groups up. And you'll be able to have good conversations with people from different perspectives as well, but I kind of think it's an all of the above strategy as we continue on through the process, so.
Okay. And I agree with you in the sense that when we do come together, that we'll have a better understanding of what their primary focus is, and they're gonna go ahead and kind of be thankful that we're dealing with some more number crunching issues.
I mean, it is a ton of things to think about for each one of these areas. And there's different ways of going about thinking of them, but that's why we get people in a room together to talk through them. So, was there,
Can you go back to that one I think climate piece? That there was.
But you're wrong now.
Just been thinking a lot in the context of resilience about for flexibility to shifting water supply. I think it is captured there. Thank you.
anything huge missing that, was it, that you see from what was in 2013, what we should be considering now?
The only thing missing that I did notice was an environmental category of energy generation.
Needing like an offset?
Like the hydro concept change.
Let's see, how did they describe it here?
The ability to generate electricity from the project.
It's probably embedded in the carbon footprint.
So this was, yeah, it was embedded in the carbon footprint. Does the proposed alternative have the ability to generate energy to offset the gross energy requirement of the alternative, in turn reducing the net carbon footprint of the alternative? Carbon footprint considerations include energy to construct the alternative as well as operate and maintain the alternative. So I guess it's just inherent in it. It just wasn't mentioned, so.
Yeah, it should be here. It was. I promise.
How much coordination or collaboration was there in 2013 with other public utilities? With Northwestern,
I'd like to make that
The public to like the wastewater system or?
just energy production, electrification with Northwestern Energy.
Oh, I see. Boy, I don't recall reaching out to Northwestern just much. I will say that in some other work that we've done, we've reached out to Northwestern Energy about, some concepts. That right now, I think Northwestern Energy has a handful, and they're not really willing to lend too much technical resource to pie in the sky type things.
Yep.
But that's not to say we couldn't try again.
I'll buy the Saturday.
But, okay, what might be pie in the sky?
No, I mean,
Pie in the sky is putting solar panels over highlight reservoirs so that you reduce the evaporation and then generate energy from.
So I'll try to speak a little bit more concrete. We were talking to them about a potential pumped hydro system where in springtime, when flows are high, generally energy consumption isn't necessarily at peak. Wintertime, you have the heating demand. Summertime, you have the air conditioning demand. Springtime, you're kind of at a little bit of a lull in terms of power consumption. So if you take what could potentially be excess power from the grid and excess flow in the river systems, perch that water up high. And then in the late summer, when you need that water and you potentially need more power for air conditioning consumption, you would then release that water not only to meet a water demand, but also to generate energy. That was the concept that we reached out to Northwestern Energy about. And they just didn't have they just didn't see merit in it.
I'd be so curious to know how much water they use with their delivery system, just to deliver or distribute electricity, like what their water use is.
I don't know exactly. I can bracket maybe a little bit. Right now, I think the Missouri River is flowing around 4,000 probably a little bit less. And I track it only because I'm fishing, it's very. So I wanna know what the river's doing, I guess. But they generally try to regulate the river, so they're not flowing much more than 6, what I've seen. I don't know what their policy is,
Yeah.
but if it flows much higher than that, generally you start to see water going over the dams in Great Falls.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that, if I remember correctly, the northwestern dams there are just around the river, so they're sort of tied to whatever Bureau Rec does at Canyon Ferry. So if there's an increase in outflow from Canyon Ferry, they have to match that.
Yeah, I'm assuming there's some coordination on how much pull Northwestern Energy has, I couldn't tell you.
Has there ever been a consideration for micro hydroelectric coming out of the Highlight Dam?
I've heard. Maybe.
I mean, I don't know what the total drop is from the outflow to. But I mean, I did some coursework in micro hydroelectric and, it certainly is a possibility. It, I think should be looked at some level.
There are some public water systems in the state. I know Whitefish has a micro hydropower facility on its Haskell Creek source, I think. So it's definitely not unheard of. It would just be, harnessing the water from the whatever infrastructure components you have there from, at Highway. Like what you have for a penstock, for instance, or would you have to, what kind of internal modifications would you need to actually, harness the water before it's released?
And you already have the water level, you've got the drop, you've got the energy to be harnessed. It's just a matter of going ahead. And I'm not talking a lot of energy, but we're looking at some possibilities there.
I think in the forthcoming water treatment facility plan, there's a little bit of a narrative around it. And at this time, it was kind of found to be not passable now. Microhydroelectric.
Yeah.
A little bit clear to that, and that's specific for the city's facilities, and this is city supply off highlight.
Yes.
Not highlight upstream of our intakes. The analysis was just looking at for our supply lines from highlight to the fisherman plant.
Well, I recommend we take, even though the food's not quite here yet, might be a good place to stop for stretch our legs and regulate fluids. And then we can take a few minutes to scarf down a little bit of lunch before we start over. We have the remaining of the meeting is basically to go over the different alternatives that were considered in 13, give you a high level overview of these, and then your homework's going to be to read up on them in more detail. And then next time when we come back, we'll be asking which of these you think should be continued forward into the process in the study. McKenna's looking at me like, should be saying something and I'm not, so I'm gonna open the floor to.
This is half of the alternatives.
I'm sorry.
We'll touch on the others next time. You didn't make me have enough time, but we'll have ample discussion.
So just 10 today.
Yeah.
There was 20 total, right?
6.
Very similar aspects.
So, sound like a plan?
Just
Lunch. Oh, we
Yeah, so
we tread water just long enough to, oh, okay. Respring it.
It's all on.
Yeah,
The dam rings or stuff like that. But then you'd also have to.
this thing goes to TSA.
And I assume they're.
There's nothing electric. Yeah. This morning. But I really just. What I think you're sure.
Releases.
So I know that they're pulling us forward.
Is there wire?
No, that's a power. Talk between the city of Bozeman and Johnny about water and the water service. Source of demand, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Yeah, politically, there's been the issues with that, but.
I was saying, or at least staff got together and talked about it.
Thank you so much.
I think that I tried additional.
Thank you, I appreciate it so much.
Just because the way our.
I got the-
They were like. It becomes more feasible to so closer to.
In the right spot. That's a good question.
Yeah, right.
Let's go through.
But, you know, it's.
I mean,
We started with everything.
no, I just, I don't know that whole super delivery.
Yeah, I think there's a scope of emergency care.
No, I think we're trying to drop our salad. Yeah, it just looked different than the other one, so yeah. No, I really don't to like give it to you as though we know it, like, I will take it all.
So I was. Yeah, that was.
I haven't seen that. Oh, that was the picture.
Yeah, it's already. Meeting last night, I heard.
Yeah,
You only got half. Only got.
Their water.
There's just a few items on that. The whole commission is like.
And you're.
Yeah, that's a discussion. We need to have a session.
Oh, here, so.
So I.
Check on.
It's not, and also be interesting. Station.
Which I think is talking about this, right? I might trade some agreement, yeah, we said that to ourselves at the last one we worked over there. She can start her pyramid.
The baseball.
Well, it's just like. So much.
Yeah.
So many questions.
Past
thank you for, the layout of this, instead of just trying to cram some of these into two on a page, where it's kind of like some of the writing was too small.
Yeah, what is the preference? Cause we could do that, we could do like the really tiny slide with like the note lines.
I like this.
You like full
It's
page?
got room to write.
Or like, slide notes.
Is that an option? Okay, we can do that too with that
Yeah,
one
it's
time.
like a half page slide.
Okay.
Guilty about making you proud of all that paper that was on there.
Yeah, we missed the double-sided button, so.
So, does everybody understand the exercise today for the, kind of the rest of the meeting today? The idea is to keep you, bag of tea, and get you guys thinking about the different alternatives, kind of what they to us analyzed last time, and then there won't be a test necessarily, but there, that comes after your homework. The following meeting, where we'll ask you kind of where's your gut say, we should go with these, not go with these, all that sort of thing, so. Hearing no questions, I'll turn it back to the professor.
So yeah, I had recommended that we go through all of them in one meeting, and wise Matt was like, no, let's do that. So we did split it up, which I think will be beneficial, and will give you guys a little more time with the previous IWRP to review on your own time. And then we'll start really doing the work, which is to think about alternatives that we want to evaluate in this round, in this update for the IWRP. So I'm gonna go over 10 of the alternatives from the previous IWRP. Nothing about these is set in stone, right? We could evaluate these moving forward, we could not evaluate them moving forward. Assumptions surrounding them have changed, making whatever cost and benefit they had previously no longer valid potentially. So this is really just meant to spark brainstorming and discuss what has been thought of previously.
Real quick before you get started, can you help explain how these handouts work with, are these similar?
Yeah, so this is also part of the IWRP, I think it's Appendix C, it has little cut sheets for each alternative, and here, IU1.
Okay.
So IU, integrated utility, are alternatives that were grouped, based on like optimizing or, using basically wastewater effluent. And then WFD are water supply development alternatives.
Yep.
I should say that, and then OS is other supply alternatives. They were previously grouped into 3 different categories. Does that help?
Yeah, so as we go through these slides, these are supporting materials for this.
Yeah, this is a lot more detailed than I will present today.
That's great.
So integrated utilities, alternative 1 and 2, is non-potable reuse of wastewater effluent. Actually, the difference between 1 and 2 is 1 would serve what we term North Bozeman, so closer to the wastewater treatment facility, and it's easier to distribute that non-potable reused water. Alternative 2, IU2, was expanding that non-potable distribution system to the south to serve irrigation in the south of town, or in the south part of town. That at the time, that was assumed to supply approximately 4,000 acre feet. And this would offset either current irrigation water, potable irrigation water, or potentially offset other people's water rights. So for example, Riverside Golf Course, they have their own water rights. They actually have a diversion from East Gallatin, and they have wells. So one thought would be to use wastewater, especially because it's proximity, would be to use treated wastewater to irrigate the golf course offset that water rate that they use. Is one sub-alternative of these alternatives. Questions on these two? The next is very similar. Water reclamation facility.
Thank you.
Which is the wastewater treatment facility.
Maybe a silly question, so we can go back and look at the 2013 report to see some of the detail, but does this include kind of any information on how the decisions were made on whether or not any of these were pursued between the last time and this time, or we're just looking at, here's the alternatives and here are the things to consider? They're standing from the last report?
That the intention is to, of my opinion, is just to present the alternatives in completely unbiased and for you all to evaluate them and potentially others moving forward. You'll probably remember, Alan, that these alternatives weren't carried forward in the previous IWRP because of concerns about in-stream flow in East Gallatin River.
What I was trying to remember is kind of, where they were left off. Yeah. Should have remembered that.
No, you're sorry, I didn't mean to imply. Integrated utility alternative 3 and 4 is essentially the same thing, but adding potable reuse. Looking at offsetting actual potable reuse, with potable demand with reused water. We looked at different options, blending it, having it be its own source. We even talked about aquifer storage and recovery, and in a few different places, but that was one of the considerations here. Agricultural irrigation.
Can you, help give context to the supply numbers? Like, what does that mean? And that's 4,480 acre feet of potential, or like, just set it in a little bit of context, what is that supply in acre feet?
Yeah, I'll do my best. I actually don't know a ton of the details, and I don't know if Nate remembers here, but I think that was based on the average winter demand or flow, treated flow, which is about 4 MGD.
Probably I'll also recognize that you're not gonna be able to do irrigation during certain times of the year. So there's an assumption about, how much water you could actually use and when you could use it.
Was it demand-based maybe rather than, it might have been actually, yeah.
And, so tying, I don't know how much to get into the weeds on this. There was a discussion about some of the members from Bozeman, at the time, the nutrient limits were coming out for Montana. And so I can't remember when the big project was done in Bozeman water reclamation facility.
Finished in 2014.
Yeah, so that project was in progress, in a big way when we were looking at these. We also knew that the water quality was going to be, pretty decent with respect to reuse for non-potable. And so, that was, something that we looked at, but there was also, quite a bit of conversation between, the ability for Bozeman to maintain that water rate all the way to the end of the pipe. So if some of you are familiar with Colorado water law, I'm not an expert in it, but there are some rights that have to be returned to the watershed, and there are some rights that can be used essentially to extinction. The conflict that happened with respect to, the water rate being returned to the watershed versus, the implications of treatment. I think we had some DNRC presence on that, TAC at the time. And I think there might even have been like some DEQ presence, I can't remember, but there was definitely, some conflict there. And I think that might have been, part of the genesis for the, I guess, some inclination for the state agencies to consider land application as a suitable disposal strategy for wastewater. Meaning that the stringent water quality requirements for the receiving stream wouldn't necessarily have to be met because you'd be putting that water on land for agricultural irrigation, for instance. Not necessarily direct onto a human crop that would be, something like that, but for alfalfa or something that would, go through another animal before it comes back. So that's a little bit of background on that. But there were some people who were concerned about not providing that water back to the watershed, which was really the concern about why these alternatives weren't carried forward in a big way.
Just to make sure, thank you, that helps. And I took away from that, if you were to implement these alternatives, it would be 4,000. That's the supply potential. If you were to implement.
If based off 2013.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah. Like the numbers just irrelevant, sort of not irrelevant, but in context, that helps. Thank you. I just knew that we were gonna see this supply on every slide and I didn't know. So
Yeah, good question.
For the purpose of this study, I would assume if we considered an alternative that was similar, we would probably develop a whole set of assumptions that could potentially change that 4,500 acre to something. It could be similar or it could be very different. It just depends on which, the ideas that come up from this group.
Question. Can you explain to me at the water treatment facility, does all the water that gets treated, does it just go into the East Gallatin now? And, in dealing with the water quality of what the treatable water now is versus, I assume it's okay to put into the surface water, but it is not a potable quality. So in order to go ahead and achieve a potable quality, that would then taking the water that's coming out, the effluent out of the water treatment facility and then constructing a new facility to then treat that water to bring it up to potable standards and then be able to then distribute it. Am I understanding this whole thing right?
Yeah, so here again, I struggle to get into the weeds too much, but yes, you're on the right wavelength in terms of thought. So, the level of treatment provided by the wastewater plant, some people would call it very high quality because of the level of treatment that's provided. Some would even consider it degrading because it isn't quite up to what they would consider to be supportive of aquatic life without generating algae or potential growth. Right. So from our perspective, in the technical side of things, I would consider the effluent from the Bozeman wastewater recovery facility to be very high quality. The potable standards are a completely different dimension, but arid western states are, we used to call this concept, it got a really bad rap because a lot of people would connotate it as toilet to tap. Right, and what, toilet to tap?
Okay.
That was kind of the connotation that potable water reuse got. But I think through, a lot of public perception efforts, the idea of doing direct potable reuse is gaining some traction. It's not that it's not being done. You could also do indirect potable so that, like if you had, there's some facilities where they have some natural watershed water, they add their wastewater effluent to that, so if they kind of let it, kind of combine together. If you consider, kind of a similar mentality of, the water that goes to the Missouri that eventually gets into Canyon Ferry, that's taken out of there and put into the Helena regulated reservoir that's used by the city of Helena. It's indirect potable reuse, but it has a long time to kind of assimilate back into the environment. And then the treatment process that the Helena uses get that up to, potable standards, right? If you're going to take wastewater effluent right off of the pipe from the wastewater effluent facility, generally the consensus is that you have to provide a whole heck of a lot of treatment for many reasons. Number one, the pathogen control and concern about protecting human health, but you also have aesthetic issues, odor, taste, that sort of thing. So the treatment technology you're throwing at this water is just about everything but the kitchen sink.
Sure.
So yeah, I answered your question in a very long-winded way. I apologize for that, but in essence, if you're going to just put this stuff on grass, turf, you could probably use the effluent that's coming out of there, most likely. If you're going to use this for potable, the treatment technologies that you're going to do are going to cost a substantial amount of money, and you're also going to, be operating more along the lines of that Colorado water rate strategy where it's used to extinction.
Part of the reason why I asked that is because the cost difference between the two slides you just showed, 1 and 2, on where that water is going to be going, and then to throw in to now make this potable. Maybe you guys have already done that with work 2013. What that cost would be to go ahead and bring that up to potable standards, that would be pretty significant.
Yeah, surface water treatment plants these days are probably, if you were to hold a gun to my head and said, if we wanted to build a 1 million gallon per day treatment facility that's going to be surface water, I would probably tell you it's going to be somewhere in the realm of $10 to $15 million. If you're going to add all the different technologies, you're probably somewhere north of that in terms of what you would need to treat wastewater effluent, because you're adding process technology onto it.
And then you have to throw in there a distribution system to go from the water treatment facility to then where you're gonna take it to be used as potable water within the city.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. No, you answered what that was, but okay.
I have a quick question from Holly Hill, who's joining us online. Getting clear on the process of considering alternatives. If the TAC is interested in an alternative, will there be some level of feasibility analysis that happens before we incorporate it into the updated plan?
Yeah,
I would respond to that with the graphic that Zach showed on the
Screening.
the screening, yes. So basically that first level is, throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. The next one is that, if there are two alternatives that are somewhat similar, so if we're in the qualitative assessment at level 2, if there's, two alternatives are relatively similar and you say, well, this one appears to be more advantageous for this reason or that reason, you say, instead of taking, just any number of alternatives forward, let's park that other one, for the time being and take this one instead because it just looks better intuitively. And then once you get to the top, you're basically, doing the full course of evaluation from a cost, life cycle cost comparison. Does that answer Holly's question?
While you're typing yes or no, Holly, I'll also note that
She says yes, that helps.
right on, okay. That of the universe of possibilities, we don't have the resources and we wouldn't want to have to evaluate to, 10,000th of a percent, whether something's good or not. Going through these screening processes helps us dedicate those finite resources, so ones that do have some promise. And so that is where we're going to be kind of our first cut is that bottom line of that screening criteria with you guys. And you'll have a say in every level of that screening criteria. But ultimately, we would love to find consensus on the alternatives that just don't have any validity, right? That we can see just right now, it's actually something where, let's not spend resources studying something that we know right now is likely not going to work. Focus our resources on the things that have that promise. So that's my goal anyway, at this point in the process, is getting the TAC to come to consensus on saying, okay, let's take another look at that one. Let's kick that one out, into the ones that have like a fatal flaw. So that's where we're trying to shepherd this group. It's just we're winnowing down these alternatives, so we can have A2S have a good look at each one of them. So is that helpful? I hope it's helpful.
The fifth reuse alternative was offsetting ditch rights or irrigators. So the Beck Jones Canal, it would basically put treated wastewater into that ditch rather than them taking off of East Gallatin. And other sub alternatives.
I guess the caveat or the objective with that is with the assumption that the water right that you would offset, whether that would be a golf course right under the IU 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 versus, and then, this one is that the city would be able to somehow capture that water right and ideally move it to the Sourdough water treatment plant location or somewhere where it would be beneficial for them to withdraw for potable purposes.
So it's using these canals and ditches as conveyance systems for the city's
what
water?
the wastewater effluent was basically encourage or the idea behind it was, for other entities that are using water that doesn't have to be potable,
Mhm.
but they have water that could potentially, that their water right could potentially be potable. You use the effluent from the plant to serve as their source of supply, which then they don't need necessarily their water rights anymore. So you would take that water right that they have, they would transfer that to the city of Bozeman, and then the city of Bozeman could increase its portfolio that way.
Leasing, so like potentially a leasing
It
program.
could be a lease, it could be a transfer, it could be a purchase, it could be whatever.
Is this Beck Jones Canal nearby the treatment facility?
Yes.
Okay, so that's why this one was specifically talked about. Okay.
I was trying to remember that too. So are they taking water out of East Gallatin?
Yeah. Moving into water supply development alternatives. So number one was Sourdough Reservoir. Could supply as much as 6,000 acre feet, and this would be to construct a traditional reservoir. This alternative, it also did not move forward. However, kind of alternative storage alternatives or naturalized storage alternatives have been considered by the city. Beaver analogs and other ways of naturally storing water in the Sourdough watershed have been looked at further. And I would say that this is still an option that could be considered moving forward, variations of it.
Is this a photo from when Mystic Lake used to exist, or is this just a projection of if something were to be built, that this is what Mystic Lake did now?
I actually think that's aerial imagery, like relatively current. There's still a slight impoundment there, not intentionally, but.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
Pretty shallow, but yeah, there's.
I haven't been up there in quite a while, so I didn't think there was any water still.
It's not intentional, but yeah. it's-
Yeah,
it's
okay.
there. Water supply development 2A and 2B was supply from Canyon Ferry. The difference between 2A and 2B was just a different
diversion point. So whether that be from the reservoir itself or upstream near the Thompson Dam. And this alternative has been looked at further and discussed with the commission actually about a year ago, maybe over a year ago, and was decided to not move forward at this time. The thinking was, let's look at these smaller alternatives before doing this massive regional project. The supply in Canyon Ferry is obviously very reliable and very large. So that is one of the kind of draws to this alternative.
The city doesn't have any water rights to Canyon Ferry currently.
You don't, but DNRC owns the majority of it, and
Bureau of Rec Commission.
Bureau of Rec owns the majority of them and is willing to,
Allocate.
yeah.
Yeah, to add a little bit of history, the reservoir actually was constructed with municipal use in mind as one of the uses. And so Bureau of Rec has specifically told us they'd be wanted to sell us water.
Interesting.
The Bureau of Rec Commission has the ability to contract that 300,000 acre feet.
Okay.
And that's an annual amount. And I think they were doing a study when we were doing the regionalization study. You know, they were kind of reviewing whether the yield or the state withdrawal was equivalent to 300,000, but in terms of, the city has oftentimes said stored water is the gold standard. Obviously, if it's above the city of Bozeman, it's even, maybe platinum standard. But this would be something that, it's a very large body of water, that has a much larger watershed. And so it's a long distance away, but it's not necessarily out of the realm of what other, regions have done. Sure. Lake Mead, for instance, right? But if I was to go back to the previous slide where we talked about, on that level 2 screening, as we looked at different alternatives in the past, in 2013, the Canyon Ferry was viewed as, kind of an import from, a little bit of a different water body because it's far away. I'd say the Yellowstone River was kind of viewed in the same lens, where Canyon Ferry was distance challenged. Yellowstone, not so much distance challenged, but more topography was the bigger issue. But when you consider both, I think people were blending, and then you have the water right component of Yellowstone as well, to contend with as you screen. But I think people, the past TAC was more inclined to think there might be less, even though it might be, we didn't do a cost evaluation on Yellowstone, because it did get screened out before that phase, but I think that's where the concession was made of, since there's water legally available in Canyon Ferry, we can put our eggs in that basket to do a high level cost estimate, life cycle cost analysis on it, whereas the Yellowstone is maybe a little bit, there'd be some unknowns that we wouldn't necessarily be able to get our arms around before we did the life cycle. So, but that's where that qualitative analysis maybe rang true the most in terms of that level 2 between this alternative and Yellowstone.
Yeah, and I guess, to clarify, could add to that a little bit, you said it, but, even though the upper Missouri is a closed basin, so there's no new water that can be appropriated, these are storage water rights that the Bureau of Rec has that have not been appropriated, right?
That's
So they are available, like you said, they're legally available now, which would be a contract to purchase. So you wouldn't have to go through the same level that you would to get a water right, for water.
Are you saying that when the dam was originally built, they had it in mind to go ahead and have access, and recognizing Bozeman as a potential that long ago, that it, because of being a closed basin, that it could be a potential source that?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, if you look at, a lot of the documentation that was, you know, for any impoundment, they usually have a primary and secondary reasons for the impoundment. Some are flood control and some are water supply, and many of them are both. This one, I believe the primary was water supply with, you know, municipal industrial being right there. You also have flood control is, you know, a benefit of Canyon Ferry to some degree, maybe a large degree. And you also have some environmental benefit related to continuous releases downstream.
When was the dam built, do you know?
30s?
Sounds right. I don't remember the exact number, but I think that to put it in context, the total dam volumes, I think around 1.1 million, if I remember right. So the difference between 1.1 million and the 300,000 acre feet number that's shown there is what has been already allocated out of that.
I think someone's doing a Google search at the end of the table.
I was starting with this end too.
I was gonna try to find that answer very quickly, sorry for.
The thing is too, though, is that like that, I think it says a lot that they were considering that municipal supply that early on, but it does, you know, the construction of the dam itself and of that supply precedes even the establishment of the DNRC by like 40 years. And even the concept of administrative closures. That's just like so many other things that were happening back then, the Bureau referenced doing. There's just very little concept that there would be this idea that leaving water in a stream would be considered a waste.
Yeah, well, I think too that, I mean, the Bureau of Rec, when they were doing this, they were looking to try to show as much benefit as they could on all these projects, so I don't know, I mean, maybe they were, I don't know if they were specifically looking at Bozeman, but they would, recreation is usually a use that's included, irrigation, municipal water, flood control, all those things, so it was pretty high level, I think, when they were proposing municipal.
I just have to say that, so if anyone's familiar with all the Missouri main stem reservoirs, they were all constructed as part of the Pick-Sloan Act. That was, I think, signed into law in 1944. And I don't know that this is a Pick-Sloan reservoir.
It is.
Yeah. So, and if you think about the timeline of 1944, it's 4 years after the 10-year Dust Bowl, the dirty 30s.
No.
So, one would assume that, the main stem reservoirs on the Missouri were intended to, counteract the potential for another event like that to happen.
You also have all sorts of industrial demand in Great Falls, other, all that going on at that time. Much different industrial period.
So if you think about Fort Peck Reservoir in northeast Montana, Lake Sakakawea in North Dakota, Lake Oahe, sorry, in South Dakota, all of those reservoirs were built as part of the Pick-Sloan Act.
Interesting.
1954, when construction ended. Of course, a 49 structure replaced the original one that was constructed between 1896 and 1898 by Helena Water and Electric Power Company. It was a rock-filled timber crib dam that was 9 meters high and 48 meters long. That's which dam we're talking about.
Awesome Montana history lessons.
You get it all here. Zach.
And you got, read Cadillac Desert, you're good.
Yeah.
That is a good one.
Moving on, WSD 3A was tapping into the Madison Aquifer, which is a deeper aquifer in the valley, in the Sourdough Drainage specifically, and supplying additional groundwater to the Sourdough water treatment facility.
Where was that one, Mark? Was that another one that was just tabled?
This was
Yes.
tabled because, Nate can correct me if I'm wrong, but, it was believed to be not reliable. There's not enough information on that aquifer to have it be a reliable supply. That's my understanding.
I think that there's just a general lack of the connectivity to the superficial aquifers. You'd be a better expert in that than me. But I think there is more apt to consider the shallower aquifers as opposed to Madison. Number one, it'd be more cost effective to get to. And I think you could probably do a little bit more, a little bit better job of modeling, the impacts.
Yeah, what I recall, I think part of that idea comes from the fact that there was, I think it might have been a master's thesis study, but there is some documentation as the water flows through Bozeman Creek and crosses the Madison, it's losing a bunch of water into the Madison limestone up in Sourdough Canyon.
Yeah,
And so,
that's
so if-
referenced in my work.
and so if you could, like if the Madison was underneath the valley somewhere, and drill into it, develop it here, I'm not sure how that would work in terms of, because clearly it's connected to surface water, but it's already losing the aquifer, so I don't know that you would capture water, but I'm also not sure if the city's water rates include all that water, including what's going into the Madison. If it is, then the water rate question would be a little easier, but it would take tremendous geologic studies to even figure out where to get to and anywhere else besides Sourdough.
Here's part of my ignorance. I don't understand what the Madison aquifer is, and I guess to help me out in some of these things would be to have some sort of attachment that kind of, when we reference like the Madison aquifer, what is that? Because in my mind, I'm thinking the Madison River, but then you're saying the Sourdough drainage, it's like, wait a minute, we're two totally different places, so I'm not connecting the dots here.
Sure, it looks like some marker was grabbed.
I was gonna do it, then I was like, Alan might do better than this, but, so if this is basically the frontage of the Gallatin, so sour drainage is somewhere in here, the shallow aquifer is what we call Gallatin aquifer, and the deeper aquifer below that is Madison,
Oh,
and it's across the entire frontage of the Gallatins.
okay.
So it would be drilling all the way into that.
And what's relative the distance between to go through the Gallatin aquifer to get to the Madison?
That's where I don't think anybody really knows yet, because it requires some pretty deep exploratory drilling to even figure it out.
Oh, okay.
But so there's two big limestone formations that throughout the state form a pretty prolific aquifer, and they're the Lodgepole and the Mission Canyon limestones, and they're collectively just called the Madison group. So, and then keep it simple, people just call it the Madison limestone. So you drive through it going out to Livingston, it's exposed over by Logan, so it's a well-known wide bedrock aquifer throughout the state. It's got karst features in it.
Yeah.
People looking for great fault access to guys.
Oh, okay.
Giant Springs is coming out of that. So it's just, people use that term, the Madison, so that's, and I think, there may be some old geologic history to the early descriptions of a lot of those formations were in Three Forks near the Madison Valley. So I'm not sure if that name Madison comes from being near the Madison River, but it's just coincidental.
Okay,
It's
there's nothing to do, essentially nothing to do with each other. Okay.
Another groundwater alternative was to, again, access water in that shallower aquifer, somewhere in the valley closer to the city's, limits. And this option is moving forward. The city is currently looking, there's a basin-wide model, groundwater model, and the city is, moving toward test wells, to try to create a new groundwater supply. This has been brought up already, just bring it up again, Yellowstone Review Report, this would be, bringing water from the Yellowstone, or Bozeman has to the Bozeman area. And finally, somewhat similar to Yellowstone is developing supply in adjacent basins. So I think in the 2013 IWRP Bear Basin, Bear drainage was looked at, and maybe some other ones. This option, I don't think really moved forward very far because of environmental and feasibility and costs.
Mostly because of the closed basin aspect too.
Sure, and legal.
There, for this one, there still would be in the future potentially, if I'm understanding it right, opportunities for transfer of water rights,
Yeah, maybe,
because most of that water is being used to irrigate in the valley, and so as the valley grows, maybe that'll become more feasible in the future, I would think. Where we're at now with it.
As it relates to the closed basin nature of it, did this alternative explore new storage facilities in these adjacent drainages or just utilizing direct flow?
Since it didn't clear too, too many of the lenses, I don't know that they got into whether or not it would be a direct takeout with like an intake or whether it would be an impoundment. I don't think we quite got into that level of detail there now. Alan, you may have a different memory.
No, that's more than I remember, I just remember, yeah, I guess I just mainly envision that one as just being somehow getting access to that surface water as it flowed into the valley, which would be a water rate challenge.
So from a city growth standpoint, I can't remember the general drawings, but is the city looking to grow in a southwesterly direction towards these drainages?
I don't say we necessarily have a direction we want to grow. We've got a growth plan boundary that identifies a larger area than the current city limits. There's an element of, when do the developers want to annex? Because we don't forcibly annex anybody. Basically, it's if the developer is presenting an application to the city, then we consider that in conjunction with all the other infrastructure and things like that that are close to it. So, yeah, I wouldn't say there's necessarily one area we're trying to push growth to, but I think there's some natural places that it tends to go to just because it's easier to develop the infrastructure to get there. And you see a lot of that focused on the south side of the community as well as the last quarter.
Are you seeing as far as where some of the developers are presenting requests to annex? Is there any sort of preferential movement from developers in going in the southwestern direction that would make this a better alternative?
I would say in the last roughly 4 years, we're seeing more of that. I don't know if you're familiar with Blackwood Groves project, for example. That would be one on the south side. That's a fairly large project, and it's been followed with a handful of other applications in that same vicinity. And a big part of that is that there's sewer capacity down there, fairly decent road infrastructure built out in that area already. So I think it's probably a more logical area of the community from that standpoint.
Okay.
So I think next time we'll go over these again, but we'll also go over the other 15 alternatives and start to decide which to carry forward. I just wanted to, again, kind of in the theme of brainstorming, put out some other alternatives here. I think we would like to see wastewater effluent reuse reconsidered. As it was considered, but it didn't move forward in any of the technical analysis. And I think it deserves that. Stormwater transfer reuse. canal ditch improvements to optimize use, further expansion of non-potable irrigation, and water rights retirement are all additional options. I think Holly already asked, she asked a good question. Can we present alternatives? Can you all present alternatives and we, the technical team, do some due diligence on them first, just to even see if they're feasible? And I think, yeah, if the answer is yes, that's what we want from you all as well.
The canal ditch one, would that improvements mainly be dealing with leakage?
Yes.
Does all of our stormwater capture currently just go straight into the East Gallatin?
Oh, no, well, I mean, eventually, yes. Basically with every development project that goes in, we require them to capture the difference between the pre-development and post-development conditions. So basically, they're not releasing any more water than was released in the pre-development condition. So a lot of that is infiltrated in the ground, of course. And then, of course, you get some evaporation as well.
So there's basically some sort of a retention pond, sort of concept. And that's for the newer developments.
We've been doing that since the 80s, essentially. I think 1982 is when we first started requiring retention, detention type stormwater facilities. Before that, the strategy basically was to get the water to the nearest drainage as fast as possible without creating that bump in the road.
So what happens to stormwater collected in our stormwater drains in downtown core district?
Yeah, so
Where does that go?
yeah, so a lot of that goes currently to Bozeman Creek. And, you know, just a kind of an aside, one of our strategies in our stormwater program since we started that in 2015 was to place treatment units on all those areas that used to drain directly to Bozeman Creek. So we have, I think we're up to 22 treatment units now, and out of a total of 28 discharge points directly to the creek. So we've almost covered from a water quality standpoint that entire drainage.
Yeah, I was gonna say, that's probably an important thing for the TAC to know, is that between this report and where we're at today is developed this whole stormwater program in Bozeman too. Now the county is following up with something similar. I'm not sure exactly how that's all gonna look, but so it may change, you know, how people would look at these alternatives after 10 years ago. Yeah.
A couple of quick questions, just so I better understand, water rights retirement, which is a little bit obtuse to water policy, water nerds like myself. This is a catch-all for like conversion of existing agricultural rights to municipal rights, as well as retirement for the purposes of like mitigation for new development. And within the chain, okay, so it's sort of meant to be this catch-all, not just retiring water rights to retire water rights. Okay. And then the other one, I just was curious on, I think it was in the Sourdough reservoir, you talked about the city's focus on sort of process-based restoration and beaver dam analogs, that sort of natural water storage concept to increase resiliency. Is that captured in an actual alternative anywhere, that sort of natural storage component? I know that you said that that flowed out of this Sourdough reservoir alternative.
I don't think it was looked at in detail previously.
Yeah, in 2013, we've talked about it in our capital planning work over the years. We've got an item within our 5-year capital plan a little bit further back that will look at that. The thought behind the beaver dam analog is basically to slow the water down, come down the Sourdough range so that it flows out into the valley, longer into the summer period. So it'll make that source more basically, but that one's really challenging from a water rights standpoint, right? It's not like a traditional dam where, you've got a controlled discharge point and then you release water from that discharge point. I mean, it's mimicking natural processes, so it's very hard to say we're releasing this much water at this time. Absolutely.
Yeah, we just, as we were thinking under this other alternatives to consider more small scale distributed storage concepts around maybe natural. I also thinking about it in the context of Beaverhead Deer Lodge, some work I'm doing over there, there's like 100 abandoned dam structures on the Beaverhead Deer Lodge National Forest that have been just basically left behind. The opportunities to capitalize on rehabbing some of those. TU is working on a project in Missoula right now on high mountain storage, decommissioning two city of Missoula lakes and actually rehabbing another one to increase both for municipal supply and also for in-stream flow benefits throughout Snake Creek. So I was just trying to think of how to better articulate an alternative around this sort of diversified storage concept of natural small scale storage. So
One way that it's discussed in the state's drought plan, that I really like, just this, as we talk about like low tech solutions or nature-based solutions, is maybe referring to it as like integrated floodplain management, which is a big umbrella term for these processes that are very similar, but also have pretty distinct applications. The storage component is not well defined or hasn't been very comprehensively explored in any like real way, I think, in water rights in the state. So that's what makes it really tricky. But I've found anyway that describing these processes as a group in terms of integrated floodplain management or floodplain management strategies, like improving those strategies, has offered me the opportunity to shift them in a way that's like, makes the conversation friendlier in some circles.
Yeah.
Less so than others, but, I was gonna say, relevant to another slide that was up there, but I'll have to think about where that thought was. Yeah. Oh, I guess, I was gonna say, when I mentioned the questions for us to consider for this week, I spoke with some folks internally at DNRC, specifically about the criteria, the evaluation criteria. Is that, yeah, oh, perfect. Yeah, the environmental impact, obviously, like for DNRC anyway, the environmental impact and climate resiliency feasibility were like the three most important things, or like three most important things for us to consider on the DNRC side as far as like our mission goes, and that's where those low tech processes potentially.
I was thinking about it in relation to that evaluation criteria about sort of evaluation criteria of promoting resiliency and watershed function.
Yes.
So that as we deal with climate and more unstable water precipitation patterns, that you have some resiliency in which things like the Beaver Dam and water decision process based things help maintain those.
Yes.
Recognizing they don't have a head on them, that's really.
They can reduce vulnerability.
Yes, they do. Yeah.
Well, I guess, so my understanding would be that approach, the benefit of that approach ultimately would be changing the surface flow dynamics in Bozeman Creek coming into the intake. So potentially by summer, we may have more water during warmer periods of the season, may have more water overall, that kind of thing. But it's really, that's where the benefit would end up ultimately under this scenario would be more water in the stream at the right times.
Yep.
And ecological vitality. I mean, all the other like ancillary benefits are pretty safe with these types of projects.
Maybe, I thought it was a good start to the conversation about screening criteria and the like. Was there, we went through the screening criteria pretty quickly, but does it still feel right for everybody in the room?
Excuse me, are you guys part of the here?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Gave the right place.
Quick question about stormwater. Has the city,
So currently, a lot of the stormwater goes into Bozeman Creek. Has the city explored, permeable pavement to try and, have the water instead of going into stormwater to be going back into groundwater? I know that, 15 years ago, I remember being at some building trades where they were talking about some sort of a permeable concrete. I don't know if those ideas have ever taken off at any sort of level, but is there any sort of thought process about that? Build pavers. Western Cafe is pretty proud of their pavers on the sidewalk there. But I mean, it's a real valid point at a small scale, but I didn't know where the city was with regards to that and if it's something to even, if it's warranted.
Yeah, I'd say we focus more on the permeable pavers than we have permeable pavement. And I think there are two reasons for that. At the parts with the freeze, thaw cycles we get on our pavements, that's primarily how we damage our pavement infrastructure. We've tended to, avoid, those types of scenarios that I think are a little bit more prone with the permeable pavement solutions. Now that the pavers themselves, actually, they work really well when we're here. We don't have that same issue, but we wouldn't build our road system out of pavers either. I mean, you might do crosswalks.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah, I had no idea what sort of technology was out there and if it was even applicable. And I know that with our sort of weather, that the thaw freeze is a major problem.
Yeah.
For health and safety.
Yeah. Yeah, and just the cost of maintaining the street infrastructure. If you're having to constantly renew the asphalt like that, it's pretty expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah, over the years, I've had constituents, and even before I was getting into government, folks sending ideas like that from Europe is doing a lot of this. And then you dig in, you look at under the hood a little bit, and they always say like, not in a place that freezes.
Yeah.
This social criterion, does that, I'm guessing that encompasses like cultural, qualifications. Quality.
And again, if we need to add or subtract from these, please give us your opinions there. We're definitely not set in stone.
I think culture is pretty important to, include there. Maybe it seems obvious, but I think it is a distinct component of this that warrants adding it. I think culture and equity are really tied together.
So you have an example?
Yeah, I would, in terms of equity and like economic equity or social equity and social capital, I think like cultural attachments to water or to resource use are sometimes lost in the way that resources are managed. So like it really comes in just like how we value different ways that people have like attached to culture and the different cultures that exist in Bozeman. Not even just like racially, but there are different cultures that exist among people in different age groups or different demographies. And the way that money and therefore resources flow towards those groups really varies. And I think culture is a way it's not the way that it's expressed, but it's something that is really influenced by where usable and plentiful water goes. I'm sure, like, that sounds probably so academic, I'm so sorry, but like, I think, yeah, it's really tied to equity and how and people's ability to like really adequately and accurately reflect who they are and where they come from.
And it is kind of baked in here, because, I mean, in the Gallup Valley and Bozeman area, I mean, fisheries are important, and fishing and outdoor recreation, and so clearly whatever's done for alternatives, can't have a negative impact on the sort, I think, early on there was talk about, not drowning upstreams, things like that, going way back, so any of these alternatives have to be weighed in light of making sure that we don't destroy the outdoor culture that we have in those two.
Yeah, and I think about, what it would mean to get rid of, let's say, like in some places, public fountains. And there might be some contingents in the community here that aren't gonna see fountains as like a really central part of their day-to-day life or whatever. And in other camps, those are gonna be like critical places to just interact with water reliably, or to learn about it, or to just see it, like. Yeah, I'll come up with a better way to talk about it, but it's, yeah.
I think too, no, go ahead. Just, I think in so many ways, the culture of our community will be, the final yay or nay on any of these. Either from a cultural palette of what we as a community are willing to endure, what we're willing to finance and pay for as a community, that will play a role in all of these. There's such an ethic of holding water as so sacred in communities like ours and valleys like ours, where I think you probably walk into any room in Bozeman, you ask people who's fished in the last month, and you're gonna get a huge, you're probably gonna get almost 50% of most rooms where people have interacted with their water in some recreational capacity that touches us really deeply, and there's no way that we can meaningfully separate that from the technical and environmental impacts of the decisions that we're thinking about.
Makes me think of the Shield Valley culture and that group and association battling with golf course and taking their water. I mean, the comments I've heard are just, it's very culturally based, like they can't do this to us, this is who we are.
Sure, it's fine.
They need us. Pretty
Well,
bad.
we're here. We're on time. Thank you all for donating another. I hope it felt a little more breezy and a little less rushed. So whoever had the idea that maybe we should do that, appreciate that feedback, and we've implemented it. So is everybody clear on your homework assignment for this next time? So you've had experts in 2013. Is it an addendum? It's an appendix. So be experts in that, and then we're gonna I think we got a pretty clever way of getting the sentiment of the room for each one of these alternatives. So stay tuned for that. Bring your phones. Next time, not that we're ever away from our phones, but don't forget. So, nothing else. City team.
Thank you for the extra hour, I really.
Are we meeting for 3 hours again next time?
That's your.
Good, yeah.
We got it an hour in each meeting. Though.
Yeah. Well, and then you guys are all coming to join us again at 6 o'clock to welcome.
That's true. Gotta show them warm up.
Oh, yeah.
I'm gonna let you cover that.
And the next meeting is on the 17th.
And there'll always be 11 to 2, so stick with that time frame.
Yes, that's right, in this room.
So this is our room now.
This is our
No
room.
one will kick us out.
Yeah, exactly.
That's not ready yet. We'll call it quits for the day. Thank you all. We'll see you next month.